carrying on talking about smallpox and the notes that I took from The Angel of Death, The Story of Smallpox by Gareth Williams. So, before vaccination, a practice existed called variolation. Variola being the scientific name for the smallpox virus, hence variolation. Now, variolation preceded vaccination by several centuries. It was widely practiced in parts of Turkey, parts of Asia, Africa, and also in parts of Wales, in England. It was kind of like passed down a bit like sort of country medicine or peasant medicine, if you like. It was often practiced by peasant women, by elderly peasant women who would go around with a rusty needle and variolate people. So what, you may be thinking, is variolation? Variolation is quite gross when you think about it. The pus or the scabs were collected from the skin of smallpox, from a person who had smallpox, the donor. Now, you would usually select a mild case, just to make sure that, the person receiving the scabs wouldn't get severely ill. And these scabs were then used to infect a healthy person to give, hopefully, a mild case and protect them. It was dangerous, however, and it didn't always work. Sometimes they could go down with a very severe case of smallpox and die, so it was a bit of a hit and miss, but the hope was that it would give them protection by just giving a mild case of smallpox. And this happened for a long period of time before vaccination. This was how they tried to prevent smallpox from happening. The problem with variolation, however, was that it could actually contribute to the problem of smallpox by it could result in smallpox epidemics, because the person who had been variolated and got a mild case of smallpox would be infectious. They would be just as infectious as someone who'd got smallpox the natural way, and they could spread it to people who had not been variolated or who had not yet had smallpox. And this could trigger epidemics, alongside the fact that it didn't always work and sometimes the person did die. But it had a 2% mortality rate, so it was thought to be a risk worth taking compared to the mortality rate of natural smallpox of about 20%. I mean, when we think of 2% mortality rate, nowadays we do think that's pretty high, and indeed it is quite high. I mean, it's higher than COVID. But we're talking about comparatively here. Would you go and get variolated? You might die, but the likelihood is you wouldn't. Or would you risk getting natural smallpox? Maybe it's a risk worth taking before vaccination. And this practice, variolation, was also called buying for smallpox, because the donor would be paid for their scabs. For peasant women, it was usually a peasant woman, not a doctor, would scratch the smallpox blister fluid into the skin. And this was done for centuries. So to recapitulate on the symptoms of smallpox. First of all, the patient will likely experience a splitting headache, backache, and fever. Next, they will develop a rash. They will have a high fever, and they will have sores that strip off the lining of the mouth and the throat, resulting in an outpouring of saliva, painful to swallow, and eyelids were often squeezed shut and glued together with pus. This was an absolutely nasty, horrible disease. In severe cases of smallpox, known as confluent smallpox, called confluent because there wouldn't be any natural skin left, any unpoxed skin left. So if you like, all the scabs would be flowing into one another, confluent, flowing into one another. The pus would be seeping out of these open wounds and then running across raw skin, there would be it would stink. It would be absolutely, there would be a horrendous stench coming from the person. To top it all, there would probably be swaddled tightly in bedding, which would just aid the problem. And this was done because back then they believed that this would help to sweat out the contagion, because that was the belief back then. Now, in terms of variolation, there was a lot of resistance to variolation because it was seen as going against God's will. There was this idea among some that God had actually sent smallpox as a punishment for people's sins. So there was a lot of resistance. Also, English doctors saw variolation as a threat to the money made from treating natural pox with bleeds, etc. Now, smallpox can't be treated, it's a virus. And so obviously it doesn't respond to antibiotics. And, it can't be treated other than prevented by vaccination. But English doctors saw it as a threat because they made a lot of money from treating, in inverted commas, pox with bleeds, etc., and leeches and all those sort of wonderful things they used to use in the past. And the doctors soon took over and made variolation their preserve only. Took a monopoly over it. And they often made money by bleeding before performing the incision. And other extras would include purging, which are obviously completely unnecessary and often make the patient quite sick. And in actual fact, purging and bleeding and things like that, actually often when a person had smallpox and they were treated with bleeding and purging, if they didn't die from smallpox itself, they almost certainly would die from those things. So that would just increase the mortality rate even further. There's a lot of ritual and mystery and secrecy surrounding medicine at the time. Also, the poor often could not afford variolation, so there was a class divide. The wealthy got variolated and then they would spread the pox to the unvariolated poor and to their servants. The principle behind variolation, they didn't really understand this at the time because they didn't understand germ theory, but the principle behind variolation was that the virus would be handicapped when it was implanted into the unfriendly environment of the skin. The immune cells, drawn to the sites of tissue damage, would then rapidly pick up the foreign protein of the smallpox virus, and that would then trigger an immune response. Whereas if you got the virus the natural way, through the air, and that would go down into your lungs, and the infection would start from your lungs and spread out, obviously then it was kind of like hidden to the immune system, so it would then take longer for the immune system to get to the virus, and by that point the virus would have replicated out of control. It would be a lot harder for the immune system then to effectively eliminate the virus, and the person would be a lot more likely to die. It wasn't until 1840, however, that variolation was banned under the Vaccination Act, because vaccination was a lot safer than variolation. Vaccination didn't trigger outbreaks of smallpox, and so they banned it. Because for a long time, variolation existed side by side with vaccination. Vaccination was first used at the very beginning of the 19th century, or the very tail end of the 18th century. But for a long time it coexisted alongside variolation, but then eventually variolation was banned. However, variolation continued unchecked into the 1970s in India, and it did set off outbreaks that undermined the vaccination campaign. Okay, so I'm going to stop this now. I do want to come back to this next week because I'm very interested in this subject. And I just can't help but talk about it, because obviously although the history of smallpox is full of horror and misery, it's also a story of hope, because we did of course manage to eradicate smallpox off the face of the earth in the World Health Organization eradication campaign that began at the end, I think it's around 1966. It lasted just over 10 years, and the last natural case occurred in 1978, if my memory serves correct. I'm not talking about this just off the top of my head, in Somalia, which is actually a case of variola minor. That's where the last case occurred, the last natural case, because there was a case another case which I'll come on to later, which actually occurred in this country in a biological accident. But the actual official announcement from the World Health Organization came in 1979 that smallpox has been eradicated off the face of the earth, and an absolutely amazing achievement. So I will be coming on to that as well. So I hope you found this video informative, and thank you for watching.